Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are talking with Brian Cuban. He is an author of a new book called The Ambulance Chaser. He's written a memoir called The Addicted Lawyer, talking about his time working in the legal profession while also having drug and alcohol issues, as well as body dysmorphia issues, and how all that kind of mixed up together. I made a terrible flaw in this interview. I didn't research my guest properly. Brian Cuban is Mark Cuban's brother, and if you listen to this interview, you'll hear me put those two and two things together about 20 minutes into the interview, when he brings up the Dallas Mavericks and all this sort of thing. And so so that's a very interesting sort of thing. Moral of the story, Cameron, Google your guests. Learn about who they are before you ask them onto your podcast. So, you know how we do things around here. I'm a one-man show. Sometimes things get weird. If you're not used to getting things around here, well, stick around because things sometimes get weird around here. Anyway, fascinating conversation, super interesting guy. Was great to chat with him. And yeah, here's the interview with Brian Cuban. It's the Cameron Journal podcast. Let's go. This is the Cameron Journal podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we have author Brian Cuban on. He is a lawyer turned author. He wrote a book called The Addicted Lawyer, and he has a new one coming out called The Ambulance Chaser, which is all sorts of people's affectionate names for lawyers. And so we're going to talk about the law and addiction and books and all sorts of things. It's another one of my fascinating, interesting author interviews where we talk with interesting people who write books. So welcome, Brian, to the Cameron Journal podcast. How are you?
Great, Cameron. Thanks for having me on.
You are very welcome. So why don't we start off with you telling us about the latest book that you just released, what it's about, and what inspired you to do it?
Sure. It's a break from my usual books, which my first two have been memoir style nonfiction. It is called The Ambulance Chaser. It is a legal thriller, and it is about a personal injury lawyer who struggles with drug and alcohol issues and who finds himself accused of the murder of a high school classmate who disappeared 30 years ago. And they find her remains. He's arrested, and he flees and becomes a fugitive to find the one person who can both prove his innocence and save the life of his son who's been abducted.
Perfect. That's like, John Grisham meets like Taken. I like it.
I heard John Grisham meets the guy from the Fugitive, Richard Kimball.
Yes, exactly. That's an apt comparison. Very apt comparison. So when it comes to this kind of fiction thing, what got you to do this and break away from nonfiction?
I've always enjoyed writing, and you can only tell your own story so many times. And I wanted to do something different. My first two books were about my struggles with mental health issues and addiction and eating disorders. And so rather than writing about my character, I decided to create a character. And it was a much different, there was a huge learning curve. It's one thing to tell your own story. We're all experts in our own journey. But to create new characters and a storyline and something that's people hopefully find interesting was definitely a learning process.
Yeah, which was easier for you, the memoir or the fiction?
Memoir for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely memoir.
Yeah, the memoir is such a unique sort of style. There's a lot of classes on memoir. Like every writing conference has like 3 workshops on memoir. And I find it the reverse. I find it easy to make up stuff. It's writing about myself that I find very hard.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's being in the recovery advocacy field. That writing about myself was not the issue. The issue was doing it well, right? And,
Yeah.
and I guess with any book, and I'll certainly find out with the ambulance chaser as I continue to paint on layers of thick skin, uh, in anticipation. I mean, they're just it's a different skill set, and being vulnerable and being authentic. Writing a memoir is certainly something that is not easy for everyone.
No, it definitely is not. And to that point, you mentioned mental health and recovery and advocacy and all this type of thing. The the struggle with addiction and all that sort of thing figures quite prominently in your work. Why don't you walk us through a little bit about your own journey with drug addiction, mental health issues, and then we'll trade war stories.
Sure. Well, I am in long-term recovery from cocaine addiction, alcohol addiction, as well as traditional and exercise bulimia. For people who don't know what exercise bulimia is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary offset of calories, which happens to be my biggest recovery struggle today, my relationship with food and exercise. And all of this wrapped around a lot of childhood trauma. I was a heavy child. There was a lot of fat shaming in my household. I was bullied severely at school. I was actually physically assaulted, and over kids who thought I would look funny wearing this particular pair of pants my brother Mark had given me, my older brother. And the first thing that happened was when I went on to college at Penn State, I decided that my route to self-love and popularity with the other kids being accepted was to become thinner. So I began to restrict my food intake. And this was in 1979, before anyone was talking about eating disorders, and certainly not for men. And then I transitioned into bulimia. And from there, I transitioned into exercise bulimia. So I was binging and purging while also running 10 and 20 miles a day. And then as I went through Penn State, I turned to drinking, so I didn't have to feel my feelings, and I didn't have to feel seeing this ugly monster in the mirror that I thought I was. And that transition, and then I added cocaine to my resume. My first of 2 trips to a psychiatric hospital the summer of 2005 when I became suicidal, and was literally saved by a friend who emailed my brothers, who came into my house, and I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand. Arrested for DWI, 3 failed marriages, and lost my career as a lawyer. And then finally, I began my recovery in 2007.
That's a journey. Let's unpack that a little bit. So I feel you on weight issues. My father is 6'7". So I was gonna be a big dude no matter what. And it was very difficult growing up in a world that is like not optimized for that at all. And when you have a weight problem, everybody is either making fun of you or giving you free advice that you never asked for. And so that is, I can definitely see like the pipeline from kind of one to the other. What is it about when you come from that type of trauma? What do you think the appeal of drugs is?
I can tell you what the appeal of
I
drugs.
have my own ideas on this, so I always ask other people to see how close my theory is to the truth.
Well, what we have to start with is that I don't consider myself an expert in anything but my own story. So I can tell you that the appeal for me is that all I ever saw when I looked in the mirror was this kind of monstrous creature who wasn't worthy of love. And when I drank, I didn't have to feel that. When I did cocaine, I finally loved myself when I looked in the mirror. So it was all about loving myself in very unhealthy ways. When I binged and purged, it gave me a feeling that the next day everything was going to be okay. The next day girls would like me. The next day I'd get my first kiss, and all these types of things that young teens want and associate with love and acceptance. And I was very classic. I'm the middle of three boys, and I was classic middle child syndrome. I was very shy. I was withdrawn, and I really wore anything negative said to me and internalized it and wore it like a skin tight suit. And so it kind of set up the perfect storm for me to kind of cycle through all of these destructive things to find something that was so elusive to me, and that was self love.
What is the what is that like? What is that journey coming out of addiction and all this type of thing? Everybody talks about the whole self love thing, which is something I've always it's something I've always struggled with, but I've also kind of thought was rather silly and, just kind of like seems like an odd thing. What's like the shape of that? What was the shape of that journey for you?
Do you in recovery or in addiction?
In recovery, kind of after it was all over, you got to this place of, more
Sure,
self-love and all this type of
I
thing.
got it.
Like,
Well, I'm
yeah,
still trying to get to that place. And,
Yeah.
and what to be more specific, when I talk about self love, it's really peeling back the layers of my life, which I do in therapy, which I've been through many different types of therapy, to peel back the layers of my life to a little boy who never felt loved and kind of heal that little boy so that little boy could love himself. And that may sound very esoteric, but it's been very effective for me in therapy because you really have to understand the journey. And there was a lot of fat shaming in my house. My mother, I used to come home from middle school, and this is in the 70s. I'm a boomer. And I used to eat Chef Boyardee ravioli out of a can and come home from school. My mother would come home from selling real estate, and she would say, if you keep eating that way, you're going to be a fat pig. Now, my mother's mother said these things to my mom, and my great-grandmother probably said these things to my grandmother. Fat shaming in families can be generational in nature, and I come from a Eastern European Jewish family, from the old country, very intense relationship around food. And my mother had her own mental health issues and had a very, very difficult relationship with her bipolar mother, very mentally and verbally abusive. And so the stuff kind of runs downhill. And this is the 70s where, a woman talking about being depressed or having any kind of mental health issues, you could be put in an asylum. And so no one talked about these things. And obviously those kind of things would make a teen depressed and think your mother didn't love you. And she loved me dearly, but was struggling herself. And then I was also being bullied at school. So I began to eat more and more, and I became a bigger Brian. I became a borderline obese Brian. And the bullying really was difficult in school. And all of this culminated, Cameron, and when we talk about snapshots of trauma in our lives, and when I first started not loving myself, my brother Mark had given me a pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants, if you can imagine that. This was the 70s. It was Saturday Night Fever, John Travolta, Mark Talk Disco. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, but my brother, I love my brother. We're very close. I have a younger brother as well. And I wore these pants to school. But they fit my older brother okay. For me, I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle, right? But my butt looked like 15 cats back there trying to get out. But I didn't care because my brother, because these were a symbol of my brother's love for me and how close we were. And the kids made fun of me, as you might imagine, calling me a fat pig and fatso and all the things, all the cruel ways kids bullied in a time when bullying was brick and mortar, right? Going viral in boomer days meant 15 kids in the lunchroom knew about something.
Yeah, it's just, it is, here's my problem with the self-love narrative, is we act like it's something we have to do within ourselves and of ourselves and all this type of thing. But the reality is we as humans are programmed to crave and want group validation. And validation of our family and our clan and our tribe and all this type of thing. And this has been programmed for this way for 100,000 years. So I don't see how you can enjoy one without the other. Like,
Well,
if you're going to like and appreciate yourself to some degree, you have to have somebody, some people somewhere who appreciate you for you.
absolutely. We all seek out acceptance, peer group acceptance. But we also have to differentiate between normative discontent in our body, right? Which is, everyone looks in the mirror at one time or another and says that sucks. At least in the industrialized world, right? In the so, but that there is a difference between that and when we engage in unhealthy behaviors, and we have an unhealthy body image that tips over into dysfunctional and destructive behavior, and we seek out acceptance, and we seek out acceptance in very intense and maybe destructive ways. For me, all of this kind of came to a head when I was wearing these pants and walking home from school with these kids who were, in my mind, the popular kids, the kids who were going to the football games after school, the prom queens, the prom kings. My images were the kids I saw every day. There wasn't Instagram. And so my images of popularity. And they decided I was just too fat to wear these shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants my brother had given me. And they physically attacked me, and they ripped them up to shreds down in my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities, my tube socks, my Keds tennis shoes, and my Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt, grew up in Pittsburgh, and threw them out in the street and walked on like they had done the greatest thing ever, high-fiving. So Cameron, I went out in the street and I picked up the shreds of these pants, and I covered up my tighty whities, and I waddled on home, and people gawked, no one stopped. And I got home and went down in our basement, and I buried the pants, and no one was home, and I buried the pants shreds at the bottom of this wastebasket, thinking that, okay, well, if I just hide them and they'll get thrown away and I'll never think about this again. But that's not how trauma works, is it? The body remembers, the body keeps the score. And we talk about traumatic snapshots in our lives, and it was right around then that I started to look in the mirror and only feel that there was only this ugly monster who would never be loved by anyone in the mirror. Now, whether you call that lack of self-love or self-hatred or whatever, but the bottom line is that I was repulsed by what I saw. And that is what I took into my adult life.
Yeah, I mean, let's step forward a few years. So by the time you got to college, you had started, using substances, all this type of thing, and started this weird sort of like, purging, exercising cycle, which I kind of understand. I was never, I was never one to like purge like that. I just kind of kept eating less and less and less, and I was, a gym rat that went to the gym 4 days a week and was powerlifting and all this type of thing. Which is funny because now I look back at pictures of me in high school and I'm kind of like, I look fantastic. What was I complaining about? Like compared to today, I'm kind of like, I would get with 18-year-old me. And so it was just kind of like, what was the everyday thought process during that time? Like, what was your thinking in all of that process?
Oh man, I mean, obviously, it's impossible to remember an exact thought process, right? Because memories are just memories of memories.
Yes, of course.
But loneliness. The feeling that I remember thinking back was just intense loneliness and isolation. That's what I remember. And the only way, and I compensated for that loneliness. I mean, I was lonely. I went to Penn State. I was lonely on a campus of 100,000, with over main campus of 50,000 people or 100,000 people, right? I felt completely alone. So I binged and purged. I would go out for these long runs. And I began going to the state store and buying bottles of tequila and going into the alleys where the Penn State bars were and drinking the bottle before I would go up to the bars. It was a lot of compensation for intense loneliness. And I can still kind of feel that kind of gut loneliness when I think about those days.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I think, I think one of the most fortunate things one can have in life that I think makes a big difference is like having, that kind of foundation of like a loving and supportive family. And if you don't have that, as far as surviving life as we know it, I think that's terribly crippling.
It can be. I mean, we have to remember there's a difference between cause and correlation, right? I've seen kids come out of the most loving families ever, and I mean, and they're dealing with opioid addiction, heroin addiction. They've gone to prison, and so it's hard. I mean, environment does play a huge role. Genetics plays a role. Peer, your interaction with your peers play a role. If we can figure all that out, we'd all be great. How that all interacted.
No, yes, no, for certain, for certain. And it just seems like, I know, it's one of those things, like, and obviously this is not scientific at all, but I have a category on the blog called observations. One of the things I have observed in life is that people with rather traumatic childhood backgrounds tend to have very difficult early adulthood. I have one friend who kind of escaped that. My friend Nick came from an awful, like, double divorce childhood, all this type of thing. And of all of our, like, group of friends that I knew, he's the only one that, like, never had an addiction problem, all this type of thing. Been with the same, woman for like 10 years now, all this type of thing. The rest of us, on the other hand, no. Like, we were all kind of a mess. So it's just one of those things that's like, if I'm looking for, like, what do all of these disparate people have in common? That's a factor I look at and say, I think there's something to that.
Well, you're right about that.
Yeah.
You're right about that, Cameron, because we know scientifically, we know that peer-reviewed data shows us that there is a very strong correlation between trauma and addiction, trauma and depression in adulthood, and trauma and other things going on. And you can cycle through the DSM-5, right? But we know that there's a strong correlation. That's why there's so many books written on it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So coming out of college, what, like, your tequila fueled undergrad, why did you pick law?
That's an interesting question. I never wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers. I had no concept of being a lawyer. I wanted to be a police officer. I was a criminal justice major. That would have worked out well, right, Cameron? I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the baby laxative for the blow.
There was actually an interesting scandal in Massachusetts where they had a lab tech who was doing just that.
Yeah, well, the French, the French connection, right? And
Yeah. No, she literally was, like, using the state's drug testing lab equipment to make crack for herself. Like,
Yeah.
And it was a whole, yeah, it was a whole. It's on Netflix. If you want to watch it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And but yeah, I mean, that would have probably been a bit of a, like, we've made a huge cocaine bust, and there you are, 1, 2, 3 for me, 1 for the evidence.
There you
1,
go.
2, 3, 4, 5 for me, 1 for the evidence.
There's a strong possibility that would have been me.
So you gave up on the police officer idea and decided on law.
What happened was I was sitting in the placement office at Penn State, thumbing through police officer jobs. And I was listening, and there were these two guys next to me that were talking about taking the LSATs. And I knew them both. We're all in the same major. And they were both from Pittsburgh, like me. And they were talking about going to Pitt Law, the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. And I'm eavesdropping on their conversation, and the bells start going off in my head. And they weren't the bells of, well, I want to be a lawyer and, be Clarence Darrow, emulate Atticus Finch, change the world. They were the bells of, law school is 3 years. I can stay in law school I can stay out of the world 3 more years, and I can binge and purge, I can run, I can drink, and I can engage in the behaviors that have allowed me to survive to this day. And it made perfect sense to me. That's why I went to law school.
Well, I can't say your logic was far off. Like, I mean, it's,
No,
yeah.
But you'd be surprised, Cameron, how many I talk to a lot of law students as part of what I do, and you'd be surprised how many are in there for not for those specific reasons, but for reasons that are not their own.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I was actually going to go to law school. My master's degree is in international relations, and I wanted to do international law. And so I was going to go to law school, and actually every one of my advisors from my graduate program advised me not to do it. Keep in mind, I was having this conversation in 2011, and the market for lawyers back then was virtually non-existent. And one of the professor said, if you can do literally anything else, you should not go to law school. Um, and I ended up taking their advice. I also didn't do a PhD either. And I started, going out and doing, marketing, and I worked in fashion and all this type of thing. So it's it's an interesting. I'm not surprised that there are people there for different reasons, because it seems like it's one of those things of you have to, if you're going to go do that, you have to do that. You have to do it because either someone's pressuring you to do it, or you think that's the only thing you can do.
Yeah, and I didn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't talk to my parents, didn't talk to my brothers, didn't talk to anyone. I said, okay, I'm going to take the LSATs and I'm going to apply. And I think my parents were as surprised as anyone when I told them that I was going to Pitt Law. I think they were happy because I was home, but and then that summer I did get into Pitt Law, even with all the drinking and everything. And that summer I worked as a store detective at Joseph Horne's in downtown Pittsburgh. The summer between my senior year in college and starting law school, where you basically hid behind mirrors and watch people shoplift stuff, and then say, "Surprise! Here I am with a pair of handcuffs." And the mirrors were not in changing rooms; they were out in the main area. I didn't want anyone to think it was a pervy type thing, but
yeah.
So I did that and went on to law school and walked through the doors of Pitt Law as an alcoholic, as a male struggling with 2 different eating disorders and beginning to deal with major depressive episodes. Not quite the recipe for law review.
No, but then you somehow graduate past the bar and start practicing law.
I did graduate. I didn't do very well, but I did manage to graduate, and I didn't even bother. It's funny, I didn't even bother going to graduation because I was so ashamed. So I just Labor Day 1986, with maybe 50 or $100 to my name, I got a Greyhound bus and took it to Dallas, Texas, where both my brothers lived. Here in Dallas, the Labor Day 1986. Met my older brother at the bus station and moved in with him. And it was kind of like throwing gasoline on a fire, because he and my younger brother, they're in their 20s and they're out drinking and dating. They didn't do drugs, but I fit right in, and my drinking escalated. And then the summer of 1987, it was in a nightclub a nightclub that was in a hotel in downtown Dallas, in their bathroom. I discovered that one thing that for the first time in my young life allowed me to look in the mirror and not see that monster and not be repulsed. I discovered a little white line that allowed me to see a reflection that I loved, that the girls upstairs loved, that my mother loved. She loved me dearly, but struggled with her own issues. And so that was quite a powerful feeling for me when I did that first line of cocaine in that bathroom in 1987.
No, I understand that. Coke was always my favorite drug of choice, and I always liked it because I feel like it made me more outgoing and more popular. And I am autistic and ADHD, so people always hated me for the longest time. So it was for me, it was an exciting experience to be running around with people in nightclubs and all this type of thing. And I was working in fashion. I was in a magazine and I had models around me and all this type of thing. And it's I was the chubby brown kid who did not fit in. And all of a sudden I'm hanging out in VIP sections of nightclubs, drinking expensive champagne with beautiful women with Russian names who barely speak English. And I'm 24 years old and I'm winning at life for the first time ever.
That was me. That was me when my older brother became famous with the Mavericks. All of a sudden I could do those things, and that's a whole other story.
No, I told someone that whole business ended awfully and terribly for a whole thing. That's a novel coming soon. But that whole thing is, I told them, I was 24 years old. To most 24-year-olds, being in that environment is incredible. That put drugs to one side, just that's addicting. And then on top of that, you add in drugs and how good you're feeling. It's years afterwards, my friend Jenna, we've been friends for 15 years. She's like, here's the thing that you forget, Cameron. When you did coke, you became the world's most colossal asshole. And I could always tell when you were high because I never liked you. And I've always liked you since the moment I met you. And so thanks for the feedback. I had no clue. And so she was very happy when I ended that part of my life. But no, I completely get that. Absolutely. It's, you know, it's
Yeah,
kind of a weird thing how that happens.
yeah, and the downside of that is it made me. I was kind of like you. I was one of the biggest douchebags on the Dallas party scene.
Yeah.
When I was coked up all the time. But it's hard to be a competent and ethical lawyer while you're coked up all the time. And I failed the bar exam 2.5 times because of drugs and alcohol before I finally passed it. And I wasn't a very ethical lawyer. I would take any case I could just to fund my drugs and my party habit. And then in 1990, I got arrested for DWI. That didn't stop anything. That was only a little blip in my mind. And I eventually lost I lost all my clients. My brother Mark put me to work for him after he had bought the Mavericks. He also had an interest in the American Airlines Center, and they were just building it at the time. And this was, I want to say, they were finishing it up, and maybe this was 2000. And he wanted to kind of pull me up by my bootstraps. So he said, "You'll go to work for me." And I was a miserable failure. I was showing up at these meetings with some of the most important people in Dallas, hungover, high on cocaine, and all this. And he had to pull me out of that. And here's where I have a privilege, and I acknowledge the privilege I have. My brother was basically taking care of me because I no longer had clients, and I would have been living under a bridge. And yes, I would be disingenuous not to acknowledge the different privileges I have, the financial, the skin color, all those different things. But I'm alive today talking to you, so I'm glad he did.
Okay, this is really embarrassing. You're Mark Cuban's brother.
Yes.
Oh, that's really embarrassing. I did not realize that when I booked you for this podcast. I am so sorry.
There's nothing to be sorry about. I mean, it is what it is, right? Everybody's somebody's sibling if you have siblings.
Listener, I am so. This is when Cameron didn't do his homework on his guest.
If you have siblings, everyone's somebody's brother or sister. But
yes, no, that's true. No, this is quite embarrassing. This is quite embarrassing. I cannot apologize deeply enough on behalf of myself.
Oh, don't even worry about it. It's to me, he's just my brother, right? But
yeah, he was just
but when we were talking about being douchebags on the scene,
yeah,
when he became famous, and I had no self-identity, right? I hated myself, and so all of a sudden I found that I could walk into the clubs, people gave me free drugs. I was dating girls half my age, and those relationships were all revolving around drugs. Right?
Course,
why else would a girl half your age date you?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But and it was, so what you're saying kind of resonates with me, because that I decided that if I couldn't be Brian Cuban, and I don't know who Brian Cuban is, and I hate, and the Brian Cuban that I do know I hate, right? When I look in the mirror, I can be Mark Cuban's brother and get all these free things and enjoy that kind of name, fame, popularity. And I was just a huge douchebag.
Yeah, no, it was kind of, it never occurred to me that I was just kind of like not a very nice guy. Well, until like years later, I'd already like gone, like I'd already gone through recovery and therapy, and I'd moved from Denver to Seattle to like get out of that scene in that world, like needed a change of address, all that type of thing. And like years later, Jenna was like, "You were always such a huge asshole when you were high," and I was kind of like, didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was kind of an interesting sort of thing. So that definitely is a bit understandable. But so kind of what so fast forward to 2005, 15 years go by. You're working in the basketball, all this type of thing. And then eventually rock bottom comes.
Well, but that wasn't rock bottom, but it was a low bottom. And the summer of 2005, I had really gotten to the point, because my entire life was cocaining through the day and Xanaxing, or cocaining through the night and Xanaxing through the day, right? It becomes a vicious cycle, and it becomes very hard again to practice law or do anything. I had done cocaine in the state courthouse, the federal courthouse. I'd showed up to hearings on cocaine. And it was just this huge, it was just awful. And there's a saying, cocaine's fun till it's not. and it was definitely not. And I lost all hope that I was ever going to love myself, look in the mirror and see somebody who was worthy of it. And I decided I would be doing my family a favor by ending my life by suicide. And so I obtained a weapon, and I emailed a friend some that I was going to do something with it, and he contacted my two brothers. And my younger brother came into my house, and I was zonked out on Xanax and cocaine, and had been drinking, and the 45 was on my nightstand. Mark flew in from LA, and they cleaned everything up, took the weapon, and drove me on my first of two trips down to a local psychiatric hospital, kicking and screaming. They're trying to save my life, and all I want them to do is leave me alone in my bedroom and leave me to the people who love me, at least until the cocaine is gone, right? Just the people that I did drugs with, or to just finally put myself out of my misery. And of course, they love me dearly and weren't having any of that. And they tried to put a psychiatric hold on me, but being a lawyer, I knew what to say. In Texas, you have to be a danger to yourself or to others. And they couldn't make that happen. So they drove me back home, did what I call the Cuban rehab. They took my car keys, said, stay in my house, stay in your house for 2 weeks, don't party, don't do anything, and everything will be okay. And that's not how addiction works, is it? And I remember thinking, no problem, my drug dealer delivers.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm like, that just means that you can get the party, the drugs, and the everything. You just come to you. It's like, if you can't export, you import. Like
Exactly. But it was also clear, which is what I did. And I was so angry that they were trying to tell me what to do, that the moment they left my house, I got a cab, the pre-Uber days, got a cab, and went down to the car dealership and got a new set of car keys. But the other thing that was clear to me is now it is in their face that I have these issues. I'm not ready to change yet. And so I distanced from my family and my father, who knew nothing about any of this stuff, my brothers, and just kind of secluded myself into the Dallas night scene again with the people who cared about my drugs and my ability to provide them, and cared about the party, cared about the bottle service and the tables, things I'm sure you understand.
Oh yes,
And so this went on through the summer of 2000. In the January of 2006, I was out at one of my week-long birthday parties that started when the cocaine began and then ended when the cocaine was gone. And about halfway through it, I was in this nightclub and I met this woman. Her name's Amanda. And I guess I was able to put on one of the last masks I had to this deceitful mask that I'm this respectable lawyer, right? And we started dating, and she moved in with me. And then I remember when she moved in with me, one of my buddies said, "Brian, you do what you do. She doesn't do what you do. How's that going to work?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to stop. This is going to cause me to stop. I like her. I think I may love her, and so this is it." And so now I'm starting to think about it, right? I'm in the stages of change now, and I'm understanding that this needs to end. So come Easter week, but it didn't end. I was doing it right under her nose, and hiding it from her. So come Easter weekend 2007, she went to Houston to visit family. I went out with my buddies, and it was a Friday. And the next thing I know, it's Sunday afternoon. I'm in bed. There's cocaine and Xanax on my nightstand. There's bottles of wine, empty bottles of wine, in the bedroom, and she's looking down at me like, "What the hell?" Probably trying to figure out she walked in the right house.
Right. We have it's like the key work, but am I at the right address?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm trying to get my bearings. I don't understand that almost 2 days have passed.
Oh yeah.
And I'd had a blackout, and I'm trying to think I'm thinking, oh shit, and I'm trying to think of a lie to explain this Law and Order episode, orgy of evidence, that I might not be the person I represented myself to be. And all I could think of, Cameron, was kind of a metaphorical running home to mama. I said, "Take me back to and I named the psychiatric hospital in Dallas." And she looked at me and said, "You've been to a psychiatric hospital?" Yeah, there's some things you don't know about me. So she drives me down to the psychiatric hospital. So I'm standing in the parking lot for the second time in 2 years, waiting for intake. And she's crying, and I'm thinking she's gone. Well, I mean, I'd leave, but she didn't. You know what, Cameron? She stood by me, and we dated for over a decade while I rebuilt the broken trust and found recovery. And we've now been married going on 5 years. So not all relationships will survive these kind of things, but ours did. One, because she's a saint, and two, because I had to do the recovery work for me, right? Because people do leave, trauma happens, people die in your life. And so,
No,
we
I was having this it's funny you should say that, because I was having this conversation with my best friend the other day, and he and I both, did the recovery thing. I ended up going to rehab by getting a job at a rehab place. Then I tell people, I'm like, the universe knew I would never go as a patient, so instead it got me a job at a rehab place, like running the business side. And then my boss would be kind of like, you know what, you have a lot of like childhood trauma and whatnot. You should start sitting in on some groups and doing some books. And then all of a sudden, I'm like there with our clients, like talking about my life, all this type of thing. And I'm kind of like, it was just like going to rehab in the just weirdest way possible.
yeah.
It's like if Nurse Ratchet starts, hanging out in the asylum, and it like, and I told, and it's, and I told, you one of the things you learn in that world is that most a lot of the people you meet are not going to make it. Like, keep your black suit handy, because there's going to be a lot of funerals. And the other day, he called me and he was crying. He said, all of my friends are dead. And I said, Griffin, that's the world we come from.
Well,
like the reality is a lot of these guys are, and they all OD'd, of course. It's like people are going to relapse, people are going to OD. There's going to be funerals, all this type of thing, And yeah, you might have started to get them high the first time, or you were the first one that they partied with, whatever have you. And we just get to live with that guilt, my friend. Like, that's on us, and we get to live with that shit. And this is what, unfortunately, this is the situation. Sadly enough, there's little to be done for it.
Well, and it's a different world as well from when I was doing blow, right? Now, there is always a substantial risk that everything is contaminated with fentanyl, which was responsible for, I believe, over 60% of the 93,000 fatal overdoses in 2020. So
Yeah.
it's a much different world, drug using world, than when I was, snorting up, multiple 8 balls of blow, right? When it was
Right.
when it was cut with baby laxative or this or that, but not
B12,
fentanyl.
yeah.
So you really weren't worried about that type of fatal overdose. They still happen because people mixture and things like that. But yes, it's very sad. We are losing people left and right. 93,000 last year.
No, and I told them, I said, here's the reality of it, dude. I said, there, but for the grace of God, go us. It's like your friends are in the hospital because they overdosed. I said that could, like, if things had gone ever so differently, that could be you or I.
Yeah.
Like, literally there, but for the grace of God.
Which is why I'm a huge proponent of safe supply. There's only one requirement for recovery, that's to be above ground. And, we live in a world where we're never going to, not in my lifetime, or probably 4 generations, we won't be seeing legalization, but we should at least be an empathetic society to allow people to test their drugs, right? So they're not going to fatally overdose on fentanyl. Fentanyl test strips are illegal in Texas, they're illegal in Pennsylvania, and they're illegal, I'm sure, in a lot of other states. I just don't get that. That's another conversation. But in any event, so standing in that parking lot, I also thought about something my father said to me, Cameron, standing in that parking lot. My father, who was the greatest generation, he was a CB in World War II, was at the Battle of Okinawa, then went to Korea. He and his older brother, he was a middle child like me, he and his older brother operated an auto trim shop in Pittsburgh where they reupholstered cars. They reupholstered the seats in cars, put on convertible tops, reupholstered the occasional couch. Very, working class kind of guy, didn't go to college. And he used to say to my brothers and I growing up, he'd say, guys, wherever you go, whatever you do, pick up that phone and tell your brother you love him. Tell your brother, make sure he's okay. And this was the relationship my father had with his two brothers as the middle child, even though he worked with his older brother and it was sometimes like a bad marriage, but they loved each other dearly. And I thought about that in that parking lot, and I wasn't ready to lose my family. And that was really kind of what turned it around. Why then and not in 2005 when I thought I'd be doing my family a favor by ending my life by suicide? I don't know. Right? How do you ever know when all the right things are going to come together? That's why people, I mean, how many times do people relapse? How many times do people go to treatment before they find recovery? 6 or 7, I believe, is the average. So you just never know when these things are going to come together, and hopefully they do. And that's when it came together for me, standing in that parking lot of that psychiatric hospital for the second time in my life. April 8th, 2007.
Yeah, that was, yeah, I'm sure while you were standing in the parking lot in rehab, I was probably getting high that weekend because my birthday is in April. And it was 2007. I don't really remember anything about that period of time, but knowing me, I'm sure that's what was going on.
But if you want to know how that kind of stuck, that what our father said to us, decades later, 1,200 miles away from Pittsburgh, where we grew up, my two brothers and I live walking distance to each other, and that's not an accident. And until my father passed away, he lived across the street from me.
No, and I think that that sort of thing is lovely. Is lovely. I was going to wonder what inspired you to finally write this whole story down.
Well, the writing started with the first book, which was Shattered Image, which was about my struggle with body image and eating disorders. And that was really a cathartic journey of healing. I wasn't writing it to help anyone but me. And it was just kind of instinctive. I had been blogging since 2007, and I wrote my first blog about my struggle with eating disorders, and I believe it was 2008. And it was the first time anyone knew I'd struggled with bulimia. And my motivation was, okay, I have to tell somebody. I feel so alone with this. And this was a year into my recovery. And I hadn't even told my psychiatrist. And so I decided, well, I could put it out on this blog. And it was, long before we had the WordPress, and it was on this blogging platform, I forget. And I put it out there, and I think I shared it on MySpace or whatever. And the response was empathetic and supportive. And I was like, wow, okay, maybe this isn't something I need to be as ashamed as I am of. And there are people who get it. And there were guys who came forward, and so that I started blogging about my mental health journey. And then I decided, okay, maybe there's a book here. And I decided.
I'm not surprised. I have kind of an informal series of posts called "Hi, my name is Cameron and I've done 2 so far. One is called "Hi, my name is Cameron and I have gynecomastia because I have natural tits from being overweight all the years and taking asthma medication, which screws with the adrenal system and all that sort of thing." And then the other one, it's sort of companion, is "Hi, my name is Cameron and I'm fat," where I talk about my crazy, attempts to lose weight and crazy diets that I have been on that would make people cry, and all this type of thing, and just the difficulty of my body just does not like to lose weight despite best efforts, including, I've made a couple personal trainers cry, all this sort of thing. And I have to say, of all the things that I have written and all the absolutely interesting people that I have interviewed, those 2 posts are the most popular. I don't know why, but people are totally fine reading about that. And I think because it makes people feel less alone,
Sure.
to be kind of oh, wow, and also I think for a lot of people in those situations, that vulnerability is so hard. And when they see someone else be kind of yeah, I was in the gym 4 days a week. Yeah, I had the whole list of foods that I didn't eat for years and years and years. It's there was all the things that I didn't keep in my home, the judgment, all this sort of thing that you go through. I think it gives people a lamp. Sure. It's not really a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a point of light out there, being yeah, you're not the only one. I'm out here too, and here's my lamp.
Absolutely. And Cameron, I have gyno. Mine is from anabolic steroid use.
Yeah.
So I'm right there with you.
It's funny because when I'm on the first page of Google for that post, because there are so few people that have been willing to write about it. And
and I never have, Maybe I feel ashamed. I don't know. That's something I have to think about, because it's something I've never written about, but I do have it.
yeah, no, I mean, yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it's not a necessarily uncommon thing. Dwayne the Rock Johnson, he actually had surgery because despite the fact he works all the time, couldn't fix his chest, had to go have surgery for it. It's not an uncommon thing. Um, and and I mean, I'm from the South and a bit judgmental. I'm kind of like, it's not an uncommon thing. Have you looked outside lately? Sort of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, and so like when people search for it, I'm like one of the few people that's like, yeah, and it's like, and guess what? I've also dated, had girlfriends, all this type of thing. Is not the end of your life. Sort of thing. And so, and I think people were responding to your vulnerability. My point of my boring you with this story is to say,
it's not boring at all. I mean, I don't talk to people who have that issue. It's rare, so I'm very interested.
Yeah. So the long story long of this is that I think people were, when you were writing about that in the early days, I think people were responding to your vulnerability. I think that's why you got that feedback. Is people, when you're writing, the job of a writer is to talk about things in terms that other people feel intuitively but can't articulate. And I think you were fulfilling the core mission.
Yeah, and I may need to explore that a little, because I still I look in the mirror and I still have issues when I look at my chest. Right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I need.
Well, visit CameronJournal.com.
I'm going to. And
so yeah, it's yeah.
But I do. The point is, I empathize with you. I also have that issue.
Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely, and it comes up in all sorts of odd ways. Like like button-down shirts can be problematic, and all this sort of thing. And it can be a difficult sort of thing. But then, conversely, it's something where, and I still talk about this in the post, it's something where I found that when I felt better about it and I didn't worry about it, that was infectious.
Yeah.
Like it changed. Like when I changed my energy about it, the way people responded was different.
Very interesting. Yeah. And for me, the problem is when I'm wearing T-shirts, because since I don't work out, I run and stuff, but I don't really have the proportionality anymore, right?
Right.
So it's much more pronounced, underneath my T-shirt, the bulges.
Oh yeah.
So that's more of an issue for me.
Oh no, I completely understand. It's at this stage of it, it's quite unavoidable. Yeah, it's just, and sometimes things don't fit quite right or whatever have you, and it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle.
Yeah.
But it's something where it's just kind of like, this is the way it's been since I was 14 years old. I'm not going to drop $10,000 to fix it. So, we're just going to move on, and we're just going to rock it, because it's like, this is who I am. This is my meat suit. Deal with it or don't. I can't control that anymore. Like,
and that's
I can't put my energy on that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm a public person. So needless to say, people say things on Twitter and YouTube. I mean, when I used to do the Cameron Cowan show, there was a guy who commented on a YouTube video, and he was kind of like, lose 150 pounds before you make another video. And I was kind of like, right, because the only people who are allowed to know things on this planet are the very thin.
Yeah.
Because that's how that works.
I get that kind of, as you've seen, I'm public too. And I get,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once a week I'll get, you're only, people only care about you because you're Mark Cuban's brother and this and that. And you just, I mean, you can't, like you said, you can't control it, right?
I mean, listen, I'm getting amazed at how uncreative people are. 3 people on Twitter have said my face looks like Mr. Potato Head. I'm like, you guys aren't even trying to come up with new ones anymore. You're the 3rd person who's talked about Mr. Potato. Like, it's like, do you guys all come from the same book? Like, like, get Trolls. A new playbook. Be creative.
Page 105 of the Troll Handbook. It's already been done. It's already been done.
It's like, oh, I've heard that one already. Like,
yeah, I mean, if I had $1 for every time someone said, well, people only know who you are because of your brother, I'd say, well, for some people that may be right. That may be true.
Yeah.
But whatever, right? You just you learn to let it roll off you. What people think of me is none of my business.
Well, and the thing about, and I think the difficult thing about it is you certainly can't control it, and you very rarely can change it if that person isn't open to seeing you for who you really are and not who they think
Yeah.
you are,
And
not
if
who
they're
they think
saying
you
it in the
are.
first place, they're probably not open.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes you just have to move on, and you just and if you have a feeling about it, because and sometimes I will admit some of this, even I've been doing this, for 8 years now. Some of it still bothers me. That's my cause to go talk to a friend, and I'm so blessed to have friends all over the world. To go talk to a friend about it, to go to go do something distracting or go do something else and all this type of thing, and not let it pile up.
No, I get it. I get it.
So
Well,
what does life today look like? Like, it's been all
well,
this time,
life
you
in
have a lovely
recovery.
wife and all this type of
Yeah,
thing. How are things now?
good. I got sober. For people who are going to want to know, I got sober in 12-step. I didn't go to rehab, residential treatment. So I still do 12-step meetings. I'm still in therapy, and I'm always working on being the best Brian I can be, and trying to change my little part of the world with acts of kindness. And I'm a recovery advocate, and I help people. People reach out to me all the time when they're struggling, whether it's body image, eating disorder. I'm fairly well known in the legal profession because of my book, The Addicted Lawyer, and so I do a lot of public speaking. Not so much during COVID, because that really shut down the whole public speaking thing. But sometimes virtual. And I just finished and I'm excited about my new book, my novel. And I talk to my brothers. I see my brothers, and I live a very quiet, kind of, I won't say isolated, but very reserved life. I lived the life of the real Brian Cuban, who was never the life of the party, didn't need to be, and my wife is kind of the same way. So we live a very quiet life with our two cats, and just enjoy it a day at a time. It's funny, I'm 60 now, and you realize less time in front than behind, right? And you kind of, your priorities kind of change, and your view on life changes, and your view on friendship changes, and what really is friendship. And I've gotten comfortable with my direction, something that avoided me for decades, or I avoided.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a place of zen that I aspire to. Not there yet. But I'm zen aspirational.
No, I get it, and it's. I mean, I'm like anyone else. I mean, do I go through times when I wonder, okay, what's the point? And I still struggle with depression, and I take antidepressants. But I think everything overall, right? I'm living a life that is far more zen, far more productive, far more self-fulfilling than before recovery. I've done a lot of things in sobriety and in recovery that I never would have dreamed of April 7th, 2007.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the reverse. I feel like my life has gotten much less interesting. I had a friend in Vegas. She owns a wonderful candle brand. Um, and and we were talking about how, in, sober life and owning businesses and running them and trying to grow our brands and all this type of thing, how, life is much less interesting and adventurous than it used to be. All the good stories
I
are
guess
from the old days.
Yeah. I guess it depends on how you define that, right? If yeah, I mean, I traveled a lot of different places and did cocaine a lot of different places. I don't do that now. Traveling is interesting, right? But I define interesting differently, and I don't view my life on a and there's nothing wrong with it, but I don't view my life as, well, okay, am I doing interesting things? I'm just doing the things that I think that make me happy, and that support my family, and that empower the people around me, and try to help. And and then if that's it, if other people view that as interesting, great. But I just view it as, like I said, trying to change my little part of the world with acts of kindness every day.
Yeah, no, I definitely have have that thing I tell, people, there's, I'm the poor fellow that when, excuse me, someone is, in trouble or whatever have you, I'm the poor, silly fellow that stops and investigates and all this type of thing. But one of the advantages of being a 6 foot tall, big brown dude is I scare people so I can get away with it. It's like I intimidate people so I can walk into dangerous situations and people are like, "Ooh, whoa, back off," and it's kind of like, which is fine. It's like, but it lets me help people. So the body that I always thought was awful and terrible and all this type of thing turned out to be a tremendous asset in the right situation, despite what people on Twitter might think. So. It's a very kind of interesting and whatnot thing. So are you working on another book? Is it one and done? What's your plan?
No, well, right now I'm just focused on getting this, on the release of The Ambulance Chaser, which is December 7, 2007. But I would think there'll be another one. I'm thinking of writing a follow-up to The Addicted Lawyer. So I'm thinking of another project is that a re-release of Shattered Image, which would published, going on at least 10 years ago now, about 10 years ago. So I have different books in mind, but for right now, I just want to get this novel out and into the public.
Yeah, how's your writing process? Are you a morning person, an evening person?
I've always been a person that you just, unless there's a deadline, I just write when I feel like writing. That's why these books took so long. That's why it took me 3 years to write The Ambulance Chaser, because I never really got on a write every day schedule like Stephen King recommends, but I've never written. My best writing has never been when I felt compelled to write. It's always been when I have this, just in this creative mindset. Okay, here's this idea, and I start scribbling, and then I revise the scribble, and I have something here, and I scribble a little more. That's kind of my process.
No, yeah. Are you a hardcore outlining person or a pantser?
I started out as a pantser and realized that I'd write better as an outliner.
Yeah, here's this for me. Like being autistic, it's like I have to have an outline. I have to have a roadmap. Like I have to have that level of structure. ADHD sometimes is kind of like, let's just write whatever. So sometimes I'll write a scene and then figure out where it goes in the outline. Like, kind of surf both sides of my brain.
The Ambulance Chaser did not go well while I was writing while I was doing Seat of My Pants writing. It didn't really move forward in a positive way until I started outlining. And what did I use? Scrivener to outline it.
Yeah, I used Scrivener for about a year. Then I had Evernote for business stuff and Scrivener for creative writing, and I found this app called Ulysses that did functions of both. So I left both of those behind and moved to Ulysses. But Scrivener is an amazing tool, and I used to kind of shit on writing tools. I was always like, you don't need fancy writing tools, you don't need programs, all this type of thing. Get busy writing. Then I used Scrivener for the first time, and I was kind of like, well, cancel all that. Scrivener's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and I've experimented with them all: Grammarly, Hemingway, AutoCrit. I mean, I've looked at every different tool there is for fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Brian, it's been a delight to have you on the Cameron Journal podcast. Why don't you let us know where they can get the book on December 17th and where they can find you online?
Yeah, you can. The Ambulance Chaser is actually available for pre-order right now on Amazon. You can just put that name in, or just put Brian Cuban, and all my books will come up. That's Brian with an I. You can find, in the book is being released December 7th. You can find me at briancuban.com, Brian with an I.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.